No, I mean, engaging the fight, and this is one of the things about range. Glad you brought that up. There's a couple of, there's two different kinds of distance in my mind, okay? There's the physical distance, right? My feet to his feet, my arm's length to his arm's length, okay? Offensive range is determined by the sweet spot of the stick, okay? Out here on the stick, we have range, and we have a lot of speed, but not a lot of power. Down here, we've got a lot of power, but we don't have the range, right? This part of the stick right here, about 4 to 6 inches down from the tip of the stick, this is the part of the stick, this is the fat part of the back, right? This gives you the best balance of speed, power, and range, right? So range is determined by the access of the sweet spot on my opponent, okay? And I want to have the most access, the best access to the most targets. When I'm looking at range, that's what I'm looking for. I want to have the best access to the most targets, okay? So if I'm gonna, basically, my sweet spot on my stick, I should be able, that's where the B range is where I can hit all of these basic targets, you know, up, down, and I can hit, you know, some wraps here. So, you know, I said, here, I'm kind of at the edge of B. Over here, right? Look at the difference here, right? This is the difference between being able to touch him and engaged, right? Right at this point here, I have access to all of my targets. He has access to all of his targets, okay? The B range is a dangerous place to be because of that, because you have access to all your targets and your opponent likewise. But you know what? This is where the fight is, right? You can come out here and the C range is just kind of where everybody, you're lined up, where you're not really engaged. Actually, why don't you come out here? You got a sword shield? Just grab it, yeah.
The shield's all over.
Alright. Right? See that? Did you see that?
Yep.
I just got here and I'm engaged. Did you get that?
You see that threat.
Right. That's the engagement that I'm talking about. Right? Okay, sit back down there. That's the engagement, right? And that is partially physical distance, where I have to get closer to you so I have better access to target. But just as importantly is psychological distance, right? Establishing range physically is as simple as taking a step, right? A lot of times when I'm talking about range, I see some really crazy shit out there, you know, including this one. Both feet off the ground, you know, jumping into range, running into range, all sorts of stuff. Establishing range really is as simple as taking a step from the physical distance. Psychological distance is a whole different thing, right? Psychologically, you have to be prepared to engage combat. You basically have to say, I'm ready to engage combat. So it's like I said, it'd be nice to just say, oh, just walk right up, walk into range, right? At a certain point, it really does become that easy. And that's where it is for me, because when I'm engaging range, because the whole fight starts with range, right? You can't know what targets are available to you until you put yourself in a position where you can have access to those targets, right? So one of the things I see at range is you know, people starting the fight at too deep of a range, and you pre-program your fight, and you get this brilliant idea about the shots you're going to blow, you're going to throw, right? And it's like, I'm going to do this, this, and this, you know, and then you start rushing in and you start swinging, right? Well, to me, the way I see that as it's coming at me is it looks like Wile E. Coyote gearing up to chase the Roadrunner, you know, and there's this big emotional, psychological buildup. There's this big wind-up that is involved in, you know, and you're trying to bridge that physical distance in the range, But there's all this psychological stuff that comes up where you're like, girding up your loins and all this. And for me, really, establishing range is as simple as taking that step. Because once I've taken that step, once I've engaged that range and I've engaged the fight, the only decision that I need to make is that I'm prepared to engage the fight. Once that happens and I step into range, at that point I say, I need you to do, once I establish range, I need you to do one of two things. Either move or stand still. If you move, you're creating targets. And if you stand still, there's a target. There has to be, right? And the thing is, once I establish that range and my opponent does as you did, right? Take that step back, that's a defensive choice that you've made. We'll get into that later. But, the targets that I wanted are not where I want them to be because you had left, right? So I have to take another step to pursue that, to try to establish range to get that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's the A range. That's the B range there as well. That's where you want to be. That's where you have the best access to the most targets. C range is where we all just kind of start. It's a starting range. You're close enough, but you're not really completely engaged in the fight. Once you come out here. Then the D range is just a little bit further out from the C range. It's out here. It's not completely disengaged from the fight, but the D range, it relies a lot on a false sense of security. It relies on your opponent thinking that you're not close enough to be able to do anything. You get some of those guys like Edmund at 6'9", right? He's probably off in the kitchen. They'll get you, and you're just sitting out there and you see your opponent and you see the distance, this physical distance between you, and you get a guy like Edmund, and the internal dialogue usually goes something like, "There's no way he can hit me from BAM!" Shit, right? Right. And there's things that you can do at the D range that actually where you need this much range to be able to. You need the range. You need that false sense of security where they don't feel threatened, where you can still get to them. So there are things that you can do, but as with the A range, what I can do out of the D range is the mechanics are not as easy as they are in the B range, right? In the B range, when I'm right here, I have textbook mechanics. I have the best access to all my targets, and I can hit them all with very basic textbook mechanics, right? When I'm closer, you don't have the room that you need to throw the shots in here, so I don't have, even just throw a flat snap. I don't have the room that I would need to be if I was in the B range, right? So I got to create that room somewhere else, right? There are things that you can do, but they're just not as easy as in the B range. Okay. You're gonna sit back down there. So offensive range. Any questions about that so far? Right. That's where the fight starts. You can't know what is available to you until you get into a range where you can actually strike at your opponent. Make sense? So next we have target recognition. Okay? Yes, sir.
You mentioned the mental versus the physical range change.
Right.
A lot of times that's different for people, correct?
What do you mean?
Well, depending on usually the experience level, if I approach somebody and I'm within what I consider a C range, they'll lock up.
Okay.
Other times I can just be way back in D range and they'll lock up because I looked at it.
Okay. Offensively, your range is determined by your stick, right? And it's good you mentioned this because this illustrates the whole point of breaking out this fight. Because there's also the defensive range. That's kind of what you're talking about a little bit right there, right? But there are all these parts that are happening in the fight, right? And as these 5 things are happening on each side of the fight, they don't exactly go in order. And actually, they're pretty much all of these things are happening all at the same time throughout the entire course of the fight, right? And it seems like a lot when we break it out and say, well, you got to do this, and you got to do this target recognition, but you also have to be doing this blow recognition. You got, you got to block, and then you got to throw, and you got all these things. They're all happening at the same time, right? And to me, it's like they're firing like pistons in an engine, running at 3,000 miles an hour, right? What we're trying to do is identify the pistons, and we're trying to break this down, slow everything down, so that we can identify it as click, 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 and looking at it as a process. And yeah, I mean, it's, in an engine, the pistons that are running in an engine run on the cam rod, right? They don't run front to back. They're all kind of, and it all happens so fast that it looks like it's happening at the same time, right? But each one of those, that's why we have a timing belt on the cars, because we got to make sure that each piston is firing in its proper order. So by exploding this out, breaking it out, we get to identify each one of those things, slow the fight down a little bit, and then target each one of these things offensively and defensively. Okay. So again, offensive range is determined by your sword, right? So you don't need to be worried about how they're reacting necessarily, because that doesn't change the access that you have with your sword. Doesn't change the access you have to your targets, right? How they account for it, it doesn't, like I said, that doesn't change. Okay, when you put yourself in a position where you can reach those targets, the way they change that, of course, is, as he did, taking that step back. If they're going to take a step back, or they're going to move, or whatever it is, that changes that range, right? If I step into your B range and you back out, well, it puts the fight back in C or worse, right? And so there's you, kind of pursuing that fight after that. And that's one of those things you have to check with range before you start swinging, right? You step into range, you have to do that target recognition, and you may be at range and thinking, okay, I think I can hit the flat snap, right? Well, when you get to range, if it's still there, then yeah, you can hit it. But when you get to that range and your opponent changes something and suddenly it's not there anymore, you need to check that, right? You can't sit back here and go, I think I can hit the flat snap. Go to the flat snap, right? I mean, it'd be nice if it worked that way, but it doesn't, because your opponent is going to react. We'll get to the defensive selection later, but every time you make a move, your opponent is has a reaction, has an equal and opposite reaction. Not necessarily opposite, but it has a reaction, right? Your opponent has to account for your maneuver in some way, right? And sometimes their way of accounting for it is just standing there, right? If they do, well, by all means, lay on like a butcher, right? So, target recognition. I need to be very specific in this, that it is target recognition, not target exploration, right? You don't need to go looking for a target. It's gonna, targets are there, they have it. So this is the shield I'm using. It's 23 by 30. It's also based off the Black Prince effigy in Canterbury. Very 14th century of me. Okay. So what do you see?
Legs, head.
All of my head, both of my legs, right? With the shield itself. Yeah. Yeah, 3 dimensions. Nice. With the shield itself as it is, I can't cover everything with just the shield, right? And if I could cover everything with just the shield, it would be called a door, right? And I would probably have a frame and a castle around it, right? I can't cover everything. There has to be a target somewhere, right? The trick is that you're not necessarily going to see the target. You don't necessarily have to have visual line of sight on a target to know that a target exists, okay? You have to, like I said, it's target recognition, and what we're looking for is you want to one of the problems we get with target recognition is that we're not actually, you're more likely to decide that a target exists and go and try to create that target, right? As opposed to recognizing that a target's open. You got a really killer flat snap. You really want to be able to kill that guy with that flat snap. When you get fixated on a particular target and you want to go to that one thing, you can't see anything else. There's a book called The Unfettered Mind. It's the writings of the Zen Master and the Sword Master, where he talks about where is your mind, right? If your mind is in your hand, then your mind can't be anywhere else in your body, right? Likewise, if your mind is fixated on a particular target, you won't be able to see any other targets that are out there. Does that make sense? Right? So what you want to do is you want to step back and clear your vision out a little bit. So, like I said, you're not going to know what targets are available until you get into a range to do that. But you need to be able to step back so that you can look at nothing, so you can see everything. So you can use your peripheral vision and use that, that wider. I mean, so we looked at, made fun of the cases around here. But if we look up here, what do you see? Right. You don't see rafter plates. You do now, because I just mentioned. You mentioned earlier, it's like, riding the disco saddle, that's an extra charge. I didn't see the disco saddle until you mentioned that.
Disco saddle either, until just now.
Right. What you see here is landscape. You don't see detail. You don't see nails. You see landscape. You're looking at the whole thing, right? And if you step back, and I don't mean physically step back, but I mean if you pull back your vision a little bit, instead of focusing on that flat snap or that leg snap or that one shot that you want, you step back and you open up that vision, you look at nothing, you look at the landscape of it, right? Then you begin to recognize targets. And those targets basically just jump out at you. They kind of have to, right? You can't cover everything. Something has to be open, right? The targets can't not be there, right? But the trick is, if you're looking for a target in a specific place, you're not going to find it. And if you do find that target, you're still, the length of time that it takes you to get to that target, you're still missing out on a whole world of opportunities and a lot of other targets that are easier for you to get to. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at the targets that are available, like I said, ideally, we want to be going to the targets that are easiest to get to, the ones that our opponent is giving to us, right? Those are there's basically two types of targets. There are the ones that we create for ourselves by position and maneuver, and there are ones that our opponent presents to us. Well, the ones that your opponent presents to you, by far, easier to get to than the ones that you want to create, right? And so by stepping into range, once you get that target recognition, you open up that vision and you see what your opponent is presenting to you, then you get to move on to the shot selection is how you're going to get there. Does that make sense? So when you think about target recognition and shot selection happen, they are not one and the same. They happen close enough to one another that they often feel like they are the same thing, but they're not, and we need to be able to do that. Because basically, target recognition is about seeing an inch and a quarter of anything. Okay, a lot of fighters when they start off, newer fighters, need like a target zone like this. For you to get a target, it's like a lot of people I don't see anything. How much target do you need, bare minimum? It's got it right back there. Inch and a quarter, right? If you see inch and a quarter of legal target, that's a target, right? Now, whether or not you can get to that, that's a matter of delivery, which comes later, but recognizing that that target is there, that's what we're talking about right now. Is just seeing that 1.25 inches of legal target. And really, give me an inch, I'll take the rest. I don't need all of it. I just need enough. I'll get squeezed through it. So that's target recognition. It's just being able to see that, right? Seeing, you know, arm, leg, head, body, what have you. Okay. So shot selection is how you are going to get to that target. Okay. Ideally, you always want to throw the shot that is easiest to throw. Okay. If, like I said, I've got hold my shield right here at my chin. You know, what is the target? Target is all of my head, right? What is the easiest shot to get to that target with? Flat snap. You always want to throw the easiest shot to throw. You'd be surprised, having my head wide open, how many people want to throw an offside head. You know, given, you know, all the other things being equal and my head really being that exposed, flat snap is by far the easiest blow to throw, right? But there's an occasion where I could just cover this up just enough so that the flat snap's not there, and that then makes the wrap the better choice, because that's when you can actually get to that target with, even though it's not necessarily the easiest blow for you to throw. Does that make sense? So that's shot selection. There is actually kind of a hierarchy of decision making in your shot selection. Again, as we get back to the training, when we're breaking these things down, yes, you are actually going to be able to make a decision based on this kind of hierarchy. You know, and eventually, through practice and through drills and through training, we're going to teach you how to make better decisions about these things. Okay. Basically, you always want to throw. Preferably, you want to throw lethal target over non-lethal target. If you have equal access to a head and a leg, you want to throw the head. Get the fight over with as quickly as possible, right? But you also want to throw the easiest shot that you can throw. So if you have equal access to a particular target, flat snap is always easier. The wrap and the offside are not really, after the flat snap, doesn't get any better than flat snap. So you can go to the wrap or you can go to the offside if you can get to those, whatever you feel comfortable with. But you get to make those decisions. And sometimes, you know, you have to look at, you know, if you have part of a head and all of a leg, you might be able to get to the head. But if you know that you can get to the leg and there's an, you know, and you feel that there's an advantage to that, because not always an advantage taking somebody's leg, right? You get some of those guys that fight better from their knees than they do standing up, right? And so these are all choices that have to be made throughout the course of the fight, right? And one of the things that I focus on in that whole decision-making thing is we need to be making better decisions about the blows that we're throwing, okay? If you consider that there's a number of resources that are required in order for you to deliver a telling blow on your opponent, right? I mean, just in large-scale warfare, there are resources that are required to engage more large-scale warfare. You know, guns, gas, and bullets, as they say. You know, you need fuel to get there. You know, you got to feed your army. You got all these things. You have all these resources that are required to engage combat. On a much smaller scale, we also have resources that are required to engage individual combat, okay? Some of those things for us are time, timing, speed, angles, range. You know, there's all these things that are required for us to engage combat, okay? To land a telling blow on our opponent. In my mind, one of the things that is overlooked as far as a resource is why. Why are you throwing the blows that you're throwing? Are you throwing a blow because you think it's going to open him up for something else? Are you throwing this blow because it's a blow that you like to throw? Right? If you make better decisions about the blows that you throw, if you're throwing to a target that is less defended, where you can, you can get to it easier, it's an easier mechanic for you to throw, you can throw a blow that is not obstructed. If you make better decisions about the blows that you're throwing, then all of those resources that you need will inherently be present. Does that make sense? So taking the time to identify targets and going through this whole process and going through this whole decision making, really, like I said, it seems like a lot, and it is, but you can train this, and that's what we're doing here, okay? We're gonna teach you how to do these, to make these decisions. If you make better decisions about the blows that you're throwing, the blows you throw are gonna be better in every imaginable way, okay? So that's shots, shot selection. You guys wanna take a break? Sure. Yeah, let's take a break real quick, so.